You're listening to a podcast from the University of Manchester.
Hello and welcome to The Buzz. In this episode, we're asking the question, what will sustainable homes of the future look like? To help us answer this question, we speak to Claire Brown, a PhD researcher at the University of Manchester and the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research. But first, I've prepared a quick quiz to test Corey's knowledge of sustainability in the home. So Corey, are you ready?
Yep.
So I've got 5 small questions for you, and we'll see how you go. So, number 1, true or false? If an appliance is turned off but is still plugged in, it doesn't use any electricity.
I'm going to say it still uses some electricity.
That is correct.
Yes.
So it's false. So many appliances do continue to use electricity for things like remote control sensors and clocks. So it's best to unplug your appliance. So question 2. What uses the most water in the average house? Is it A, a washing machine, B, a shower, or C, a toilet?
I'm guessing this is like an average shower length, right?
Yep.
Because some people
Yes.
obviously take for ages. I'm gonna go with a shower.
You're correct again.
Oh,
it was
come on.
B, shower. Well done. And question 3. True or false? Leaving your heating on a low temperature all day is cheaper than having it on high when you're home and turning it off when you're out.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like so much pressure now because I got the first 2 right. I'm hoping it's the first one because that's what I currently do. So I'm going to go with true.
Your luck's run out. I'm afraid it's false.
That's doubly bad because that's what I do.
Yeah, well, lesson learned. So if you keep your heating on all day, then you'll basically be losing energy all day. Whereas turning the heating off when you're out should really save you money and use less heating.
Okay, I will keep that in mind.
Yeah. So, question 4. Which household appliance typically uses the most energy? Is it A, a fridge, B, a TV, or C, a dishwasher?
I'm going to go with a fridge because it's always on.
Fridge is correct as well.
Yes.
So a fridge can consume up to a third of all power in the house. A good tip is to make sure that you don't leave the door open unnecessarily.
That's so much.
I know. So number 5, true or false? You lose more heat from a house through the walls than through the roof.
Ooh. I'm going to go with true.
True is correct. So a typical British house loses about 25% more heat through the walls than through the roof. So obviously roof insulation is a big thing that people are recommended they should install. But wall insulation could help you as well. So Corey, you got 4 out of 5, which is very good.
That's great. There we go.
But a bit of room for improvement.
Yeah, definitely.
So someone who knows lots about sustainability in the home is Claire Brown. And here's our interview with her. We're here with Claire Brown, PhD researcher for the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research at the University of Manchester. So Claire, will a home built 50 years from now look noticeably different to how it does now?
Hi Joe, thanks for having me today. Absolutely. New homes certainly will look very different in the future in terms of design, layout, orientation. But a really interesting point to note is a large proportion of buildings that already exist will still be here in 50 years. So as well as thinking about what new buildings will look like, it's also about thinking about what we can do to retrofit. In terms of retrofitting, so that is the kind of adding something or improving something to an existing property, you'll see things like external wall insulation, added renewable technology, so solar panels on roofs, whether that is integrated into roof tiles, for example. You'll see an increase certainly in the use of air source heat pumps, and so those will kind of come commonplace as an external feature to housing. Also things like windows and shading. The climate in the UK is predicted to be warmer and wetter, so we will need to kind of mitigate for potential overheating. So shading around properties will definitely be more prevalent.
And I think you've kind of touched on this, but is sustainability, is that one of the key factors moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about new build, there will be discussions and kind of moving technologies forward in terms of thinking as buildings as material stores. So thinking about the kind of life cycle assessment of it, and not just thinking about building something for now, but actually what can the constituent parts be used for later. So if you think about windows, you've got a glass component to that, whether that might be single, triple, double glazed. And you've also got kind of metal elements potentially, or PVC plastic. So really thinking about actually, can we use those constituent parts in a new way in a different building? So if you think about a housing estate that is no longer fit for purpose, can that be kind of stripped of its constituent parts, so roof tiles, windows, bricks, and utilised to build newer, more efficient, and even climate resilient properties? So absolutely, the kind of ethos of sustainability in terms of making sure that we're using our resources wisely will absolutely be something that we will see for those of us who will be around in 50 years' time to witness.
Sure. So it sounds like we should be doing some of this stuff now, though. Is there kind of policy in place now that is encouraging things like green buildings or buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a variety of kind of policy and government support in the UK that exists. There are arguments that actually it should go further. So there are things like the Green Homes Grant, which was launched this year, where homeowners could request a grant for two types of home improvement. It is a kind of grant scheme that is kind of mixed funding, so the government will put forward some of the funding for that, and then the homeowner will pay for that. But there are, opportunities to explore that much further. If you think about when any property is sold, rented or leased, it'll have to have what's known as an energy performance certificate. So that is a A4 size piece of paper that shows you how your building performs. So that is already a metric that exists within the UK. And there are calls for that to be improved. So you might live in a house, a rented property, for example, that is currently a D rating. So it's not the worst, it's not the best, but actually there are proposals that are kind of coming forward around making sure that actually properties should improve on their minimum energy efficiency standards, really. So it will kind of push forward those improvements. So if your building doesn't perform, then you can't rent or lease or kind of have it as a landlord property. So there are absolutely kind of mechanisms in the UK that exist to that. There are historically things like the feed-in tariff, which doesn't exist anymore, but really incentivise people to install renewable technology on their property. So you would get paid for a certain amount of generation of energy. That doesn't exist now, but there are kind of examples for certain suppliers where actually the supplier will pay you for electricity generation. So a number of different suppliers in the UK will now do that for you.
They sound like great incentives. For people, for kind of like the everyday person, what small changes can they make around the home to help the environment?
There's lots of things, and lots of easy things as well. So from changing kind of older halogen or kind of incandescent light bulbs to LED light bulbs is a really easy kind of DIY thing that people can do. And if you think that kind of when we think of a traditional light bulb, on average, they were about 60 watts, whereas an LED light bulb could be 5 watts. So straight away, you are saving a large amount of energy just by changing a light bulb, and that's easy for people to do. So they're readily available, and changing a light bulb, I would argue most people are very capable of doing.
Hopefully.
It's other things like dust proofing, for example. Older properties, particularly, will suffer from a kind of draftiness, and that's a result of over time changes in the building. It might be things like moving floorboards or doors kind of not fitting as tight, and so you can buy kind of various very low cost options to kind of help with reducing that draftiness. So there are kind of floor draft exclusions you can get. You can even get tape to use around kind of floorboards and things like that, just to kind of prevent that feeling of draftiness, because most people will feel the cold through their feet. So if you can use different materials on floors, for example, so a rug is a really kind of easy to kind of achieve improvement, and it adds kind of character and can look quite aesthetically pleasing as well. So absolutely, those kind of things are kind of really easy to do. From a wider sustainability perspective, it's also thinking about actually what do we consume in our houses. So thinking about, what do we purchase? So down to food and things like that. So utilising, plastic-free shops to buy groceries, so that you don't end up with lots of plastic, single-use plastic going into your recycle bin. I've seen examples of people kind of having meat-free Mondays. So again, from wider sustainability issues about other issues around greenhouse gases, so meat consumption and agriculture, so thinking about meat-free Mondays. I know organisations like the BBC, through their Albert accreditation scheme, have done lots of things around that in terms of reducing meat consumption as a really interesting way of kind of changing consumerism.
I know you mentioned about rugs and things like that. Are there any other features kind of within the home itself that we might see introduced or become more commonplace? I'm thinking maybe things like solar panels, energy efficient doors, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we start with kind of solar panels, I've actually just had my array installed with a battery, which today is performing very badly due to the weather. However, it has performed very well. Yesterday actually was a really good day, and so. There's opportunities for that, and I think one of the interesting things in terms of design, so from an aesthetic perspective, is seeing, rather than a kind of panel attached to your roof, is that integrated element to it, so it doesn't become quite apparent that you've done something. It's very much more in kind of in the keeping of its part of the roof. So that's absolutely one thing that we will see. In terms of heating houses, obviously we've got climate change projections are for warmer, wetter climate for the UK. Some climate projections put Manchester at being quite similar to Barcelona in a kind of post-2050 scenario, which for some people will be lovely. And actually you'll see a heating demand reduction, because if we are having a warmer climate, the heating won't have to go on as often. And we will also see, and is policy, that gas boilers won't be going into new properties. I think it's from 2025. So straight away in the short term, in the next 5 years, new properties won't have a gas central heating system. So again, there is a interesting challenge, I guess, in terms of gas engineers installing gas boilers. Obviously, there'll be a need for maintenance and kind of ongoing systems, but there will be a massive push to different sorts of heating sources for properties, not just domestically, but from commercial and kind of retail and public services as well. So that, I think, will be a really big change, and for future kind of careers and career development, I think that'll be a really interesting area to explore. So you have air source heat pumps, which essentially work like a reverse refrigerator. So if you see that a fridge takes in warm air and converts it into cool inside your fridge, it works in a kind of the opposite way. So you're taking air and you're converting it to a heat kind of source for your property. Lots of them can use existing radiator systems. So again, from a kind of home improvement perspective, you're not then pushing people to have major works undertaken on properties, and the efficiency of those heat pumps is actually improving year on year. You'll see that with solar panels, we've had an improvement year on year, but also a cost reduction, which is important for not converting kind of those early adopters of technology, but for those people who want to make a difference, but actually financially it doesn't quite add up. So those improvements and putting it into the mainstream, I think we'll see in 75 years and 10 years a lot of changes in terms of how homes are heated, really.
Yeah, it sounds like there's lots of opportunities for positive change. Do we know if moving forward it's going to become more or less expensive to run and maintain our homes?
So if you look at how energy bills are made up at the moment in the UK, a larger proportion is actually made out of the taxation around that. So I guess the kind of the wholesale costs, the actual generation of electricity, in a gas-powered power station, or from offshore wind or onshore wind or solar farms, I suspect as technology is cheaper, will potentially come down. What will be interesting for the kind of domestic consumer and commercial consumers is that level of taxation that we experience. And so that, absolutely could go down, but it could stay the same, or we could see increased taxation on energy consumption to potentially pay for additional grant services or large-scale rollouts of newer technology like heat pumps. So I think at the moment we kind of have it's almost a plateau. Day in, day out, we see different generation prioritised. At the moment, if you have a look at kind of what today's doing, I think when I checked this morning, it's about 52% electricity generation from gas-powered power stations.
Right.
Largely because solar isn't, on a day like today, solar isn't performing particularly well. Same with some of the larger onshore wind farms. Weather dictates both of those, the ability of those technologies to perform. So again, it's about having that balance. And And that, I think, is one of the tricky things, is having that balance whilst decarbonising the grid. We've been quite successful in the UK in terms of decarbonising that grid. So taking a lot of coal-powered power stations off the grid has led to massive improvement in the kind of carbon intensity of the grid. But it's about maintaining that demand, and it sounds a bit cliche, but making sure the lights don't go out is really important for a lot of consumers. And I think it's about having that strength and that mix of the energy consumption, energy supply. And so if we can reduce demand on the grid by increasing our energy efficiency, so improvements in lighting, for example, in heating, potentially in cooling as well. So like I mentioned about warmer climates, if we're having to get to a situation where actually we need to have a cooling supply, then we're essentially adding in a newer kind of demand on the grid for cooling, because we are overheating. So it's really important to think about that kind of improvements in energy efficiency, and so it's even down to laptops and computer screens and the Wi-Fi that we use. It's making sure that we're being as efficient as we can. So it's shutting things off and making sure things aren't on standby. And so that you are essentially decreasing the amount of energy that you're using for whatever activities you do, and therefore not putting increased demand on the grid, because I think that'll be the interesting one. It is at what point does cooling demand increase?
Yeah, I remember reading that using a kettle can be quite harmful to the environment. Are there any other appliances in the house that people should be aware of that could cause damage?
Yeah, so using lots of things. The kettle is one of those that people quite often overfill a kettle, and if you're not going to be using that water for boiled water, why are you boiling it? And it's easy to do if you don't have a measure, on our side of the kettle. Certainly, if you're thinking about laundry, so washing machines and tumble dryers in particular, very high energy consuming, have improved over the years. But again, it's thinking about actually, can we do things, a bit differently? So there used to be a certification scheme called the Code for Sustainable Homes, which had a number of environmental metrics in it, which considered, things like lighting, energy consumption, things like rainwater harvesting in there. So, collecting water from the gutters. And they also had, you should be able to get a credit for having an outside dryer. So, those kind of wire kind of dryers that you might have had when you were younger. Having those meant that you didn't have to rely on a tumble dryer. On a day like today when it's raining excessively, that's really not helpful. So actually it's thinking about, do you need to have a tumble dryer for maybe kind of winter, but actually in the summer you can utilise, drying outside. It is important to note that actually drying your clothes inside is a really kind of over radiators is a really terrible idea, because if you think the water has to go somewhere, right. And if it, so it's evaporating, so it's water vapour in your house, it's going to find something to essentially land on. So it's preventing condensation. So when water vapour hits the cold surface and you occasionally see it in the mornings on windows, that kind of the moisture on a window. But it can lead to real kind of problems, extreme versions of mold growing. And so that again, is something that I would, I've banned it in my house. But it's things like that actually, I've not got a tumble dryer, but I'm drying it inside. It's just, that water's going somewhere, and essentially if you end up damaging the fabric, so that the walls, the floor, the ceiling, you could actually lead to wider problems and potentially defects. And, if mold grows, that's a health impact as well. So, again, something not not to partake in, not to be a kind of negative person.
Sure. I think you mentioned it there a little bit. Is there anything in our gardens, perhaps outside the home, that we can be doing? I don't know, maybe turn into like an electric lawnmower or anything else like that?
Yeah, I think in the garden there's lots of things that we can do. I kind of mentioned, I think, about rainwater harvesting. So again, utilising water sources that already exist, having water butts on property to collect water, so that if you are a keen gardener, to be able to utilise that water rather than using tap water. It's also things, the wider issue of kind of biodiversity as well. So thinking about, actually what species do I have in my garden? Are they kind of encouraging insects, so butterflies, bees, and so that you are helping support those kind of wider sustainability issues. So, there are lots of kind of guidance kind of websites that are really kind of helpful. So the wildlife trusts and RSPB, in terms of things that you can do in terms of essentially encouraging nature into your garden. It's also things like, when thinking about planting, if you have kind of areas that you can, thinking about actually what native species can we use from a, kind of garden maintenance perspective, reducing mowing regimes, using as efficient equipment as possible. You can get electric, you can get petrol, depending on your preference. Obviously I mentioned about I've now got panels, so my lawnmower could be charged off the battery. So that would be an absolutely wonderful thing to be able to do. But it's also things like using chemicals, pesticides, things like that. Actually, are there natural resources that you can use instead? It sounds hilarious, but I had a big problem with slugs earlier in the summer on my veg patch, and actually copper wire apparently kind of puts them off going into certain areas. So I've invested in some copper wire just for a DIY store and put that all around my veg patch, and it seems to have worked. So I've not had to use slug pellets, and of course slug pellets can cause animals such as hedgehogs problems. So you're thinking about kind of the wider kind of food chain in our gardens. So I would say there's kind of lots of different things, and it's down to at Christmas we all like to decorate our homes. It's thinking about actually can I use a solar powered Christmas light set outside, because actually because they're generally LED, they won't need as much energy to light up as a kind of other bulbs. So again, it's making those consumer choices and thinking about kind of what can I do differently, I guess, is almost a thinking mindset.
Yeah, it sounds like there's loads of little things that people can put in place to make a big difference. Something that's a bit more of a bigger change is electric cars are a big talking point at the moment. Do you think we're likely to see electric car chargers on every driveway soon?
That's a really interesting question, and I think personally probably we will, but I think there will need to be a big shift in almost the the infrastructure that is associated with electric vehicles. So if you think of a traditional house with a drive, for example, you essentially have a personal space to put a charger on the wall, for example, and plug it in. A lot of traditional housing in the UK is terraced housing, no drive. So where do you put the charging point? So I read recently about some trials that Salford University had actually done around a different type of infrastructure around getting that charging point into essentially the pavement to enable people to then charge their vehicles. So I think there's a lot of ongoing research. It's also things like if you think about the car as a kind of almost like as an additional battery to your house. So if you've got solar panels, you could charge them in the day, and you could put that into the house overnight. But then if you don't use your vehicle, you could use that as a battery and kind of discharge that back into the house to use, on computers and TVs and Wi-Fi and things like that. So there's a lot of kind of information out there that is exploring lots of different ideas around electric vehicles. It's also interesting about if we are discharging electric vehicles into the grid, it's making sure that we don't essentially overwhelm the grid with energy sources, which I know a lot of research is going into at the moment, in terms of looking at that, in terms of not disrupting the grid because of all of this, renewable technology that homes are kind of generating, but not necessarily needing to use, and putting that into the grid.
Are you optimistic about the future of sustainable homes?
That is a good question. I'm very much an optimist, so I would like to say yes. I think this will come from a number of different sources. So you will see, I think, a lot more people building their own homes, which are very much designed to be, very low carbon in their intensity. The materials used will have a low embodied carbon. Recyclable materials will be kind of increased. And I think if that starts to happen more, then I think the potential disruption to, kind of the mainstream house builders in particular, might be an interesting thing that will take place, because there's loads of examples of really great projects that have built really great performing buildings. So Goldsmith Street in Norwich won the RIBA Architects Award last year, which was a passive house. So passive house is a German-designed building philosophy, is probably the best way to explain it, in terms of really thinking about fabric first. So you're thinking about the insulation levels. It's got very low a kind of air exchange, so not drafty at all. And so I think when there are more and more examples of those being built, and people, kind of accept that those buildings look a bit different. It's not just a door, 3 windows and a roof and red brick. That it's, utilising different materials, different designs, that I think actually we might see a shift in certainly new builds towards that better efficiency, particularly as people aspire to be a little bit more environmentally friendly. You only have to look at the impact of recent David Attenborough Sir David Attenborough documentaries, around plastic, to see that there has been a shift in the use of plastics and single-use plastics. So, the pop-ups of, plastic-free shops. So there's one there was one in the Students' Union at Manchester. Examples like that of that shift. So I think as it gains momentum, we will absolutely see more energy efficient structures that meet the kind of the scenarios that are put forward by the IPCC in relation to how climates might change in the UK. So I think as we kind of move towards those changes and the work that the Committee for Climate Change do, we will see that push towards improvements. And people will, be able to enjoy their homes and have that knowledge that actually maybe they are generating their own electricity and they are using less. And at the end of the day, if you're not really bothered about environmental issues, but your energy bills are less, even from a financial perspective, that's a winner for lots of people. So I think that'll be a really good driver for change, I think.
I'm looking forward to more weird-looking buildings, which hopefully will be environmentally friendly. I think the Contact Theatre on campus actually hasn't that got its own? Is that weird building? We'll have to get a pitch on this show because I can't describe it. It's
I know which one you mean.
It's got those. Yeah, it's got the 4 chimney things, hasn't it? And I think it self-ventilates, doesn't it?
Yeah. I've only been in it once, but yeah, it's a fascinating building, and there are quite a few really interesting structures. The MECD building, that'll be really really fascinating when that's open and running, to kind of see how that performs. That'll be a really interesting thing.
That's all from us today. A big thanks to Claire and the Tyndall Manchester team. You can head to tyndall.manchester.ac.uk to find out more about their research. Next time, we'll be speaking to nuclear experts Dr. Anika Khan and Dr. Laura Lay, asking them all about the world of nuclear energy and finding out what positive role it could play in the future. You can find out more about the Buzz podcast at manchester.ac.uk/The Buzz. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at UOMSciEnc, and you can also search for our Facebook page and YouTube account. If you have any questions about today's episode, our email address is fsemarketing@manchester.ac.uk. See you next time.